All right, so game design. This is like our third or fourth class session talking about this stuff. And on Wednesday of last week, we'd had a chance to play through a couple of fun games. And we got to debrief them as game designers as well. So let's recouch how the game sort of fits into your larger outline for interpretation, just to kind of remind ourselves of where we're coming from before we get to the game and where we're going with the game, and then get back into playing some game prototypes. It's another beautiful day, so if you have an outdoor game prototype, today's a good day for that one. Sound good? All right, does anybody have any questions before we jump back in? Cool. Indeed. All right, let's refresh on the outline. So we have pre-game preparation. We have the intro. We have segues from the intro, which establishes a bunch of a priori stuff. A priori is fancy Latin for at first or from the outset. And then we have content. And we have a whole bunch of thematic points, which might be in order, they might not, depending on if it is sequential or topical, depending on the topic and the perspective or angle on that, called your theme, that you select and deploy in your intro. And usually we have 5 to 7 of those thematic points, and then we bring everything back together in the conclusion, of course. And we talked 2 weeks ago, what do we do in sort of the after action section of a little bit of program evaluation, a little bit of connecting with our participants, maybe less formally if they have any questions or comments or feedback, or if they just want to connect with you. And then you break things off and prepare yourself for the next round of Interp. Okay, so a game can be one or sometimes a couple of these thematic points. If you have a particularly involved game design that really does a great job of getting after not just the topic that you want to interpret, but the theme, the perspective, that angle that you want to take on that topic, and you can really explore the inner texture of it, the dynamics of it, the progression of it, like a game progresses, well then the whole thing can be interpretation, sort of couched in terms, presented in the terms of the mechanisms of that game. But not always. Usually it's more common, especially with staffed interpretation, to spend shorter amounts of time. So some games, the entire game, explaining the game, playing the game, and debriefing the game. Right? So the transition into would be introducing and explaining the game. Content of that thematic point would be playing the game. And then the transition out would be debriefing the game, setting us up for the next thematic point. That could be 3 to 5 minutes, right? The whole thing. These games don't have to be these huge, bloated, overwrought things. So what I'm trying to do in saying that is, hey, you're not on the hook to produce the next Twilight Imperium, a game that takes like an hour or more to set up and 8 to 12 hours of straight through playtime and another hour to tear down and pack up. It can just be a super simple, fun little gamified that is not quite fully a game, but has game-like elements, chunk of interactive content. Okay? So it can be light, it can be fun, it can be easy and quick. That's all okay and even good. If that helps you build and maintain focus, investment, curiosity, engagement, whatever metric or descriptor you want to use. All right, so we had a couple of brave volunteers kick us off on Wednesday. Do we have anybody else who would like to prototype a game trial? I want to give everybody a chance to play at least one game before we move on to later iterations of games and other things. So, anybody who hasn't gone yet? Would anybody like to go?
I can.
Okay, cool. And as you're getting set up, remember, with this kind of 0th draft, you're not getting graded, so no pressure. The point here is to test the game with the clear understanding that this is a prototype. And sometimes prototypes work pretty great. Sometimes they fail in hilarious and impressive ways. And that's awesome, because in failing, we can improve. We see what went wrong, and that's what we can fix. If it goes perfectly the first time, we don't have any constructive feedback out of it. Make sense? All right, that's how all of science works. We're trying to disprove hypotheses because we can't prove anything. So we're looking to break stuff. Sound good? Cool. All right. So take it away. Give us some context. What's your topic? What theme would this be under? Do you want us to follow you outside real quick? Do you want us to just sort of gather around? Do you want us to just like hang back and stare at you? What do you need from us?
Well, I just made like a matching game, but I made two so that you could like race each other while you do it. So does anybody want to try?
All right.
Anybody else? I can. Okay. I also made, if you want to play like a single player one, this was my original one that I made last week, but I made some changes because I thought maybe it was a little boring. So I thought like racing would be a little bit more fun. But you're just kind of going to like shuffle them up a little bit. And then you want this like little triangle to be on the top.
So that when you flip the cards over, they're right side up or something?
Yeah.
Or okay, got
Just
it.
so they're all facing the same way.
Yeah, that's a good move. I like
and
it.
then just place them like 4x4.
So what's the topic area? What are we playing about?
These are native plants to southern Illinois.
Okay.
So I thought it would be like an easy way to kind of teach people about like some of our different native plants and like trees and grasses and stuff.
Sure.
Okay. And so when you like flip one over and they're not the same one, you just have to like do that. Does somebody want to count us off?
All right. Let's start a timer. Here we go. Or stopwatch. Okay. All right. 3, 2, 1, go. Looks like we got 2 matches. We got 1 match. 30 seconds. So, as these two are playing, for the rest of us, you're competing against yourself in terms of memory, obviously, and you're competing against somebody else. So people who are motivated by competition-style games are going to be super into this. And somebody who's a super-duper botanist, do they really have any advantage over somebody who doesn't know before playing this game what the native plants of Southern Illinois are? Not really. Why not? You're right. It's randomized. Yeah. Okay. So games use randomization to help level playing fields because it's just a working memory exercise more than it is, and a manual dexterity exercise, more than it is a knowledge recall like a test. And a lot of us experience test anxiety. So to the point that your game puts people, especially publicly, like in front of a group, to recall facts and even more so, recall facts of things they've just heard for the first time during this interpretation, that can be super intimidating and stressful and kind of a negative experience for some folks if they're not really into that kind of a thing. Now, there's always that one small group in the larger group that loves and absolutely owns everybody at things like trivia nights at Buffalo Wild Wings or Hangar or whatever. Like, there's always that group. But for everybody else, a more randomized game like this, which takes it down to a functional memory level, is a lot safer proposition, right? Cool. All right, so how'd it go? The whole thing took about 2 minutes start to finish. So that fits right comfortably within our 3 to 5 minutes, right? And with a game this fast, you could maybe play twice. So if other folks wanted to play, or you could pass out 10 different decks or stacks of cards to randomize into those 4x4 grids and have lots of people play. So this style of game lends itself very flexibly to small groups, large groups, mixed groups, right? You can have a team of people on each one of those blocks, or an individual player or a solo person competing against the team, right? If they're feeling like a real hot shot, and so forth. So we like game designs like this one. Easy to deploy, easy for people to get into, easy for people to get through and beyond as well. All right? 2 to 3 minutes, not a heavy load. Okay? So, how did you feel while playing the game? What was sort of the core emotion that this game is built around?
Rushing.
Yeah, okay. So, kind of like focus, intensity. All right, cool. Does that square with your goal for the game as the designer?
Yeah, it was just kind of to like have fun and try to make the next one finish.
Awesome. Okay, so that's successful, right? There's no single right answer on what to build this game around in terms of that core emotional experience. As long as folks are sort of correctly connecting with whichever ones you intended, then that's good enough, right? That's a success. All right. Any feedback on what might be tightened up for the next draft of this game? There's always another draft, right? Anything that went really well? Let's try and get more things that went well than could use improvement. What do you think?
That it can be played staff or unstaffed.
Mhm.
You could easily just like leave that, so to speak, for someone to come up to it. It's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. At places like Crab Orchard Wildlife Refuge, you can go right up to the front desk, and as a parent with a whole passel of kids, or a set of teachers with, truckloads of kids, busloads, you can go right up to the front info desk and be the cool adult talking with the super cool adult in uniform and ask, hey, here we are at Crab Orchard. What kinds of kits do you have for our students at age or grade level XYZ? And they just pass over like tote bins just full of stuff. The Carbondale Public Library has had D&D tote kits for years. You can just check it out and play D&D, right? So this is a very successful, portable kind of a thing. That works really well. Other feedback? So a developmental psychologist, to elaborate on your idea there, have recently sort of started counting on to the idea that, right, each of us was a 5-year-old kid at one point, right? And each of us has also been a 10-year-old kid and a 15, and 20, maybe some of you guys aren't 20 yet, but getting there. Anyway, the idea in that particular corner of psychology is that you never stop being that 5-year-old kid with that 5-year-old kid's worldview and experiences and so forth. You just sort of add to that. So you are internally that 5-year-old kid and the 10-year-old kid and the 15-year-old kid and your current age, most of you are probably in your 20s and so forth. And you can still sort of access that childlike enthusiasm of playing a relatively simple game, right? It's not going to blow anybody's mind, but there's also nothing wrong with that, and it's kind of scratches the itch for that little kid, right? So this is the difference between being childlike as an adult or childish. Good, not so good. All right, cool. What other feedback? Any feedback?
Cards
Did they? Okay, cool. Do they have like images on them or?
Yeah, they have little like pictures that I cut out and put on there.
Nice. Okay. Cool. Sounds good. Once we get through prototypes, we'll talk a little bit about resources for putting together graphical elements of your games and other interpretive stuff relative to things like copyright and licensing. So you can do that on the up and up. Because as public-facing professionals in interpretation, we're definitely under scrutiny for doing things like copyright correctly. So just check that box and move on. All right. Any other feedback? Otherwise, who's our next volunteer for that game? Ready to roll?
Yeah.
All right, let's do this. Tell us what you need.
I have it made, so it's designed as a solo, potentially non-staff, well, ideally non-staff, miniature climbing experience game.
Okay, cool.
So I need one volunteer. Single player game. So I get down here. So here it is.
Oh, nice.
So how you would play the game is I have this rod. There's these marbles. So you balance the marble on here, and you would try to move it up this route. So that's it.
Okay.
I probably wouldn't be able to do too well because I am way too caffeinated. But it is possible. I've done it a few times.
We working at Panera this morning?
No. I'll drink more caffeine later when I work early.
I'll give it a shot or two, but then I'll pass it off. Because I got like really shaky hands, so there's like a very low chance I'm going to make it very far, but that's okay. So I'll pass it off. Oh. Yeah. Does anybody else want to try that might have like potential to be a surgeon?
I'll try it.
Here's a surgeon's trick for steady hands. Shake your hands as hard as you can, for like 30, 40 seconds. And then your hands are weirdly stable. There's some neuroscience behind that, but that's the move. Jake, go. Oh, what?
Oh no. Somebody else can try. I made it not quite halfway.
All right, so as we have folks sort of attempting this labyrinth-like game, you guys ever play a labyrinth game where you twist the knobs on the side and you tilt the thing to get the marble through and avoid holes? This has kind of that same vibe, yeah? I love it. It's instantly recognizable. It's like, yeah, okay, I can see what's going on here, and there's a meaningful challenge to it. And you get pretty quick feedback on strategy, right? So,
Kind of reminds me of that one with like the loop and the wire, where if you like touch the metal loop to the wire, like a light or a buzzer goes
yeah. Or like the game, Operation?
Oh, there you go.
There you go, surgeon's hands. All right, so your topic is rock climbing. What's kind of the specific, subtopic or thematic point that the game is designed to teach or embody or demonstrate or just kind of show?
I guess it would not necessarily teach anything specific like some of the other games, more like convey a similar experience or emotion on a like scaled down level.
How so? I see where you're going with it.
Because when you're
Connect that
climbing,
dot.
it's sort of getting to a goal. It's a single player thing essentially, unless you're like competing, where it's you against the wall, similar to where it's you against the board game.
Uh-huh.
And it requires a sense of like focus and kind of, I guess, control when you're climbing.
Okay, right on. And it wouldn't be a whole lot more work to put together 2 or 3 of these, even more maybe, of varying degrees of difficulty, right? So that could map onto like the Yosemite climb rating system. Oh, it's a 5.9, super easy, or 5.15 F. Good luck. Or something like bouldering, right? You could extend the game's metaphor a little bit to get after different kinds of climbing and climbing-like things.
Is Sloper the name of the game?
Yeah, that's what I named the box. That's the prototype name. I thought it was fitting because it's like a slope.
Yeah.
It's also a climbing wall.
So it was an interesting design choice to put the thing on a slope. Why did you do that?
Just because I felt like if it was flat, I don't know, in my head it's just like climbing. It should be going up at least a little bit, so it should
Okay.
be somewhat on a slope.
All right, so the central metaphor of the game looks like and works like the thing that it is trying to model. Okay. And in terms of progression and difficulty, you might have hit on a successful design for that. So, when the baton with the marble on it is close to the slab, it's easier because there's a lot less sort of leverage or torque to maneuver down here. If the slope is high and you're at the high end of it, trying to reach further, right, that naturally introduces a lot more wobble because the distance from the pivot point, your hand or your wrist, much further than it is down here. It grows with the hypotenuse length. Okay. So, we can use stuff like geometry, stuff like rigid body physics to kind of very subtly make the game harder as you go along. Very cool. Very cool design. All right, so positive feedback. What works well with this?
I like the board.
What do you like about it?
I like maybe the rock climbing, illustration of them.
So representative tokens in this case, or roles. Like it looks like the thing we're talking about. All right, that's a big up. What else? What else worked really well with this?
I like that there was an end goal to get to.
Cool. This game has a clear beginning, middle, and an end. I like it.
I like that, kind of like you mentioned, it's like analogous to rock climbing. So like, there's a lot of just like retrying and just starting from the beginning again in rock climbing and just like projecting or workshopping a climb. So you can kind of have that same thing model here, where like, even if you're not very good, I'm sure if you practice at it for a little bit, and as it being an unstaffed one, you have time to, like, you can get to the goal.
So the first time y'all tried it, about how many seconds would you say, just loose estimate, how long was it before the marble fell off the first time? 1 second. Okay, yeah, that's me too, right? What about the last time you did it? How many seconds? Maybe still one, but maybe it's more, right? Rapid feedback on strategy. Cool. This game is checking a lot of our boxes. That's good. It's also immediately clear what to do. There's not a 20-page rule book on this. It's just pick up the stick, pick up the marble, get to work. Okay? Workshopping your problem through the crux till you full send it. I don't actually know Iron jargon. Okay. Awesome. Nice work on draft one, man. Pretty good stuff. Anybody else? Who's next? Where is that everybody so far? Oh, in that case. Cool.
So, it has to be about, like if I wanted to do like the human map for my game and the topic was positive and negative communication.
Yeah. I mean, does that game address positive and negative communication?
Yeah.
Then you're golden, right? It's that direct. Yeah. Easy calculus.
That would be my game if I would do it.
I think we should try it. Cool. So, tell us what you need. You're the leader, and we don't know what to do unless you tell us.
Then what I would need is everybody to stand in a circle, and then you grab somebody's hand who's not directly next to you, and then kind of figure it out. You have to untangle yourself and kind of see. This is definitely more like experiential education because you're kind of learning while you're doing it. So you kind of hear throughout it the positives and the negatives of like, don't do that, no, we should do this. And then by the end, when you figure it out, at the end, you evaluate whether or not, like, what were some of the positives that you had.
I said we try it out. You guys ready? Would you like us to go outside? Do you want us to stay in here? You're the boss.
I mean, I guess there's enough room we can do it on the front.
Cool. Cool. Swing it back this way.
So stand in the circle, and you can grab somebody's hand that's like directly across from us. It's not the same person. So you can grab with your hand, and with your hand. Yeah, both hands.
Okay.
And so now we have to untangle ourselves.
On top, right? Does that feel right or
Back
not?
in over.
Oh, that did something.
Okay.
You can go under two. Somebody needs a twist. You need a twist. Or you like. And then do.
Wait, we're entangled, my arms are just twisted.
Oh. Yes.
Okay.
There
Yeah.
you go. Not bad. Okay. Cool. So how would you debrief something like this?
So I'd debrief something like this where I'd say like, if it were kids or adults, I'd be like, what were some of the challenges that we had in this? And they'd be like, so-and-so was like this, or I don't know, whatnot. And then you kind of hear what was good, what was bad. Some of the goods could be like, this person had a really good idea and we listened to that idea and we tried that idea and it worked. So like somebody was like, how about we lift our arm, and we tried that and it seemed to like work. So we'd say, that was something that was positive. If something was negative, it would have been like, oh, so-and-so like stepped on my foot. Well, that made it really difficult to finish. And so it would be like, oh, maybe next time we can be more aware of our surroundings and see where we can go from there with the positive and negative communication. So, I guess that's my game.
Sounds good. So, feedback for you. Positive. Anything to change? What? Took like 30, 40 seconds. Plenty of time for more iterations of the game. There's lots of ways to complicate this game, right? Video games use mutators, so different or alternate sets of mechanisms that you can rely on subsequent players through just to see what happens. Upregulate, downregulate difficulty, and dynamic. So very, very flexible. What else going on?
I kind of like that this like provides different teachable moments for the different groups, so it like fits their needs. If there's like a group of kids and all of them are jockeying for power, we've got that lesson to teach. But if it's a group of adults and nobody wants to step up and say anything or do any leadership, you know, like you got that to teach as well. So there's just like a lot of opportunities for different scenarios.
Like over communication and under communication.
Yeah, with this style of game, it's very helpful to, in pure group dynamic games like this, the point of the game is, group dynamic, how are people communicating? It's very, very useful to look into neurological architecture cases kind of taking over the whole group and being like, no, you should do this, you should do that, and you know, up to a point, it's a really helpful thing. And beyond that point, it really changes the dynamic, even if it's mechanically efficient to do that, to coordinate people through one sort of director. So, in understanding different kinds of archetypes of players, or play styles in this case, that can add more to your list of things you can do, or you have to, just more if you want to. Okay. So that goes for everybody. Want to take a look? The Ludology textbooks that I'm aware of are really, really expensive. So you use moving around, and look for player archetypes. Another kind of archetype that games can typically be sorted into is the sort of tripartite gamist, narrativist, simulationist style games. So gamist games are all about playing and winning and competition and using strategy to get through the mechanics of the game to that victory condition and optimize it and having a tricked out build in games where you customize a character, for example. Simulationist games would be more like Minecraft, where there's not, if you don't feel like it, you don't have to go, was it the only Ender Dragon, is that what it's called? Yeah, or go anywhere or do anything. You just are in this world that is a detailed ecological and resource and crafting simulation. Right? It's billions of square miles of simulated space, and you can craft hundreds of different items and stuff like that. And the rules of this world don't really have much to do with score. They've added some score like elements since the original game was designed by Notch and so forth. Those were kind of bolted on much after the fact. So simulationists don't necessarily care about winning. They care about exploring this mechanism, this crazy ecosystem of blocks. What's the bizarre stuff I can craft? People have coded up Game Boys using Redstone logic and PS Vitas in Minecraft, and they work because it is a very complete computing system as well as a 3D sort of voxel simulation. And then the narrativists, as the name implies, they don't really care about winning. They're there for the story. So the narrativists tend to be a little bit more socially oriented. Instead of like dominating everybody else on the battlefield, it's more of a, yeah, man, my character got completely wiped out in the big climactic battle against the big bad evil guy that beat me. But man, that was a cool story. Like, unironically saying, cool story. So, gamist, narrativist, simulationist. And when you're meeting a new group of Interp participants or whatever, you know, you can't really tell any of this stuff by looking at somebody, but in the game design space, you want to have something available for your gamists. They might love a game like you would not. They might hate a game like you would not because it doesn't scratch their particular itch. We're all at least a little bit gamers, narrativists, and simulationists. We like each in different proportions. But usually we gravitate towards one of those triforms. So, all I'd say, if your game is very gamist, like Sloper, you think about maybe on the next station, having a game that's more about the narrative, the story of some, famous climber. And you play through their life. Yvonne Chouinard or something like that, the world famous alchemists. Then, see if we can look at different, widely different from each other kinds of game designs to appeal to lots of different kinds of people. Children's museums are really good at this because they know coming in, you're going to have a wide range of energy levels, wide range of focus and reasoning levels, wide range of emotional maturity levels. So they have easy games, hard games, games of different kinds, like gamist, narratives, simulationists, and so forth. And there's absolutely something for everyone. no single set route or path through that. It's designed so that there's lots of different ways to go and encounter things, which it's very successful in that too. So, all that sounds good? All right, let's take a quick break, stretch your legs, and get some water. There's a restroom if you need to. And then we'll get back to work. On our course website, we have a document called a game design brief, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It is a design document that captures all of the operational details of what your game is and how to deploy it. And it's a useful exercise to help think in a more structured way about an early game design. It's more functional for us to try things out with a prototype first and see how it goes, and then circle back on this game design brief stuff, because now we have something to say into the game design brief document. So for our next class session, I'll link that game design brief on the course webpage, on the announcement section right in the front, and that'll walk you through a bunch of questions, most of which we've kind of had a chance to talk through verbally and interactively together. But it'll also give you the sense of, okay, so it's very useful to have potentially a whole variety of mutators, you might call them, or just optional rules, or mechanical variations, a lot of different names for them. They're all the same thing. Just how could you tweak this game kind of on the fly if you needed to make it harder, make it easier, point out something more clearly about how the mechanics represent something about your topic. Because again, we're never just playing games to have fun. We are using them as a tool to explore whatever your theme is, or some aspect of your theme. Okay, so. And the game design brief is kind of, ultimately, it's whatever you need it to be. It is to spur thought on what are, let me think about sort of the envelope of this game, all the different possible ways that I could play this game and all the different possible contexts in which I could play it. Is there any combination of those factors that makes it impossibly difficult for your players? Like, some games played outside just stop working because of things like weather, things that you don't have great control over as an interpreter. Weather's just going to come. So you want to think beforehand, what am I about to unleash potentially tens or hundreds of thousands of people over the course of my career on with this game? So it's to help sort of catch so-called edge cases like that, where you're out at the edge of, this is super rare to play this game this particular way with this combination of players and environment and rules variations or whatever, but that specific combination of players and circumstances or setting and rules is a legitimate safety concern. So this was not done well with games like Pokemon Go, which leads to what kinds of things happening when folks start playing Pokemon Go. We've all seen those news articles. Yeah, people walking into traffic, walking off of cliffs. Several people have died playing Pokemon Go. And, you know, on balance, like, there were billions of miles of walking played by a whole bunch of people over time. It was also the first game to reach $1 billion. It was the fastest game to reach $1 billion when it first came out in 2016. Like, it was a big and popular game, but the edge cases for that game were unacceptable. The earliest versions of it had people, like, walking onto train tracks and stuff like that because, you know, of a super rare, you know, holographic Mew or something. I don't know. I'm not a Poke nerd. Like, if that showed up, Did any of you guys ever see the social media videos of Central Park getting mobbed by literally thousands of people in the middle of the night in New York City to go capture some super rare spawn in Pokemon Go? Like, that was a thing that happened, and it kind of happened all over the world. So the company that made that, Niantic, made their money back and then some, but unfortunately did not really work through what it meant to have a lot of really enthusiastic little kids playing that game. So, all that to say, we don't want to ever deploy any kind of interpretation, game or otherwise, that might be named after you in a negative way, in the same way that the Pokemon Go effect has been named after Niantic's game. Again, a very successful game, but, you know, there are some side effects, some human costs. Real people lost real lives as a function of that game. Unfortunate. Okay, any questions about game design, brief stuff? It's pretty straightforward. I'll see if I can pull it up here so we can take a quick look. But it's kind of a worksheety thing. It's not really an essay type thing, but, you know, one or a couple of sentences per prompt just to think it through. Let's see here. All right, so the questions on that will be as such. What is your game? And it's asking this not just in an open-ended fashion of, you know, tell me a story. It is, what are the specifics of your game design? It is a narrativist, cooperative instead of team player competitive, exploration game about XYZ event in history, something like that. Okay, so what is your game? In general, what's the 10-second description of the game you're designing? For that one, if you can, try to describe how long you want the game to last. So in your head, is this a 30-second thing? You know, we'll play all of these games. You know, we'll continue to play prototypes and so forth. And if your expectation is 30 seconds start to finish, but it takes us 5 minutes, that's not a failure, it's just different than the expectation. So you see, do I need to chop this down to 30 seconds, or do I need to expand my expectation because the 5-minute vibe for this game actually worked a lot better, and let's go with that. So prototyping is for figuring those things out. But we want to have at least an initial answer to kind of design toward. So how long is your game? What does your game aim to do? So what is the purpose of the game? So in a sentence or two, I'm using this game to explore XYZ thematic point about my topic's particular theme in my outline. So go ahead and line that out and name those things. Let's see. You can also think as the theme section. What themes do you want your game to represent? So theme is not setting. Theme is the point or the meaning. Theme is not mechanics. Mechanics are how the game works, and so on and so forth. Okay, so what's the game really about? What's the theme? And you can get after, you know, some of the core emotion type questions with that as well. What setting are you shooting for? So what is the diegetic world, the inside of the game's reality world? That term is diegetic. Exegetic is what we as players are looking into the world from an exterior, non-inside the setting perspective. Okay? So, what setting are you shooting for? And this is to help you make sure that the sloper board looks like a climbing pitch, however that might look. And you get to make meaningful decisions of, should it be flat within the slope? Does it really need to like bust out some modeling clay and put like craggy or juggy holds, or maybe some chossy looking rock on there, what have you, to make it really sort of mimic a climbing localized microenvironment as closely as possible? Or is it more of a like a symbolic setting. There are geometric shapes on the board which represent spaces or progress or hazards or something like that, where if you're actually out rock climbing, you don't see squares and circles and triangles on the rock face, right? It's just a natural rock face. Okay, let's see. 4, what individuals and design tools does your plan require? So this is a human and capital development question. So some games, it takes a lot of stuff, you know? Games like Risk, Monopoly, Gloomhaven, Twilight Imperium, Warhammer 40k, Magic the Gathering. They take lots of physical tokens that have various functional roles in the game, and sometimes they cost thousands of dollars per player to really get up and running. We don't want to do that unless, as a professional interpreter, you have a budget and you can write to game publication companies and say, hey, here's a graphic that I need to get onto a bunch of really thick gauge cardboard in glossy 4-color with bleed and stuff like that. I've contracted a graphic designer to put all these elements together and get it ready for printing and manufacture. And then somebody legit manufactures the game. So this is a meaningful question. For the purposes of this class, right? Don't spend a ton of money, please. I think you can have a very successful game without any tokens at all, as long as it's very clear what the game is representing in the course or the flow of your larger interpretation. But this is a question just to sort of count those costs. Do I need a whole bunch of stuff? Do I have not just the cardboard to build a bunch of sloper boxes, but also do I have the energy? You know? And do I need the energy with this design to produce, again, I'm designing a card game right now, and the potential list of cards for this game is between 30 and 40,000 different individual cards. That's not realistic, right? So my come to Jesus talk with myself on how hard do I want to push on this was along the lines of, this game would be so much cooler with the more individual parts, essentially different cards. But I'm one person with not a huge budget, just doing this in my spare time for the fun of it, so I'm going to lean heavily into tools like AI to help me with putting those 20,000 cards together, 40,000 cards, whatever it ends up being. And doing it digitally means that it's write once, publish 1,000,000 times for free-ish. Okay? So think about what's the material cost? What's the skill cost? What's the human capital cost? Do you have to chat up your buddy who's really good at making drawings, if you're no good at making drawings, and so on and so forth, to get your game across the finish line to be, ready to roll out with people and look professional and be safe and be interesting and so forth. Okay? So, with paper prototyping, do you have access to a bunch of note cards? Do you have access to thick or thin cardstock? Or UV stabilized vinyl for something that needs to be colorful and outdoors? And so on and so forth. Just thinking through what's the life cycle of this game? How do I need to make it durable to be useful with a lot of kids and not break down and be unsafe? And so on and so forth. So what are the costs of my game? What are the materials? What's the human capital cost, the skill pools that I need to access? 5th, what's your target audience? Who is this for? Is it a memory matching game that kids of all ages can play because we're all still that 5-year-old inside? Is it something much more specific in its age range and scope? Neither is wrong, but you need to know what those boundaries are, really, so you can design something appropriate. So, do you want your game to be globally accepted? Are you developing a game concept that can be played anywhere, literally around the world, or is it unacceptable in some cultures or to some people groups? That's a real thing, right? Some games involve elements of stochasticity, which is a fancy PhD word for randomization. And some people would call some of those games gambling. So if you've ever been frustrated and wanted to throw your Xbone controller across the room, your Xbox One controller, because there's a whole bunch of loot boxes in your Madden 2K number, or like Football Club Manager 2025, which is just a copy paste of 24 with fresh loot boxes that you got to buy, right? That randomization in the rewards of those loot boxes is literally regulated as gambling in some countries. So if you want your Interp game to have global reach, you need to think in terms of global legality and global cultural values. If it's a smaller scale game that is definitely only in person, staffed Interp, like with Playing the Human Knot, you're not really worried about that, right? It is just people who are on site and just people who are volunteering to play that game. So you want to think about those things. And for our prototypes in this class, we're not too worried about deploying these around the world yet. But if you decide to go on to and make a professional living doing interpretation of any stripe, then you do start thinking about some of these things. We'll talk later in the semester about doing culturally appropriate interpretation, as well as how to handle important and difficult topics. Right? Interpretation is a communication tool that is really well geared to go right there, but we don't want to just go charging in that direction. We want to move through that with real sensitivity and a sense of humanity. Okay, how educated do you need to be to play the game? Like, what's the vocabulary level requirement for your players? This is a consideration for every game. You're going to have some non-English speakers or English as a second language speakers. Does your game completely fall apart if they can't read anything beyond about third grade English? Right? A rule of thumb for this semester is generally about a 6th or 7th grade reading level. That is the typical expectation for readers in the United States at this time, which is horrifying to me, but that's where we're at. So, for a matching game, do you have to be able to parse and read meaningfully the Latin name that might be in small print at the bottom of that, right? So when we were out on our Tree Campus USA tour, we saw that there was kind of a real knowledge and skill requirement to be able to do that sort of scavenger hunt with any level of functional success or safety. What cultural groupings do you expect your players to be? So Magical Pony Adventure is likely to attract certain crowds. It can be effective to use that knowledge to your advantage. It's entirely your choice. 6, what does your game appeal to? How will it affect people, right? So what's the emotional beat? What's the functional appeal? Is it gamist, narrativist, etc.? Is your game being made for a charitable cause? Will it raise money? Will it raise awareness for something that seems important to you as the interpreter or maybe to your players? What are some inspirations for your game? So are you designing it off of a pre-existing game, Human Knot, memory matching game, a labyrinth game like Sloper? What's the inspiration? Make that explicit so that you can think more clearly about, okay, I love the challenge and the sensation of I want to tear my hair out, but I really want to see this marble get to the far end of this labyrinth. But I don't love the time that it takes to get through that whole maze. So for my game, Sloper, I'm going to make it a shorter labyrinth. I don't want it to have to take 20 minutes of fine motor control to get from one end to the other for some players. Is your game accessible? If somebody does have fine motor control issues, are they just going to have to hang back necessarily? Or can they meaningfully play your game? Right? If somebody is confined to a wheelchair, can they meaningfully play your game? Can they physically lean forward to reach across and, move a marble through a maze or whatever else? That is a little bit tricky. We want to keep in mind that there are lots and lots and lots of alternative needs for diverse audiences. For example, about 1 in 3 men, so at least one of us statistically in this room has some degree of colorblindness. Probably someone in this room has some degree, even mild, of dyslexia and or dysgraphia, so difficulty reading words or numbers. Somebody in this room possibly suffers from clinically diagnosable anxiety and or depression. Is the game going to be more difficult or less safe for people in that particular space, right? About 1 in 6 people for that particular set. Between 1 in 20 and 1 in 10 is going to be neurodiverse in some way. So on the autism spectrum, ADHD, any of the other things that sort of fall in that space. Lots of different folks coming in, not exactly in a cookie cutter way. And that's fine. That keeps it interesting, right? Maybe a game is better if it's more accessible. And it's more accessible to everybody if it's more accessible to folks kind of as edge cases on accessibility. Okay? How is your game distinct from its competition? So, if you have a clear game that you've based your game on, how is your game not that game? Or is it just that game with, like, a new name, right? And that's okay. If it's basically the same thing as another game, you don't have to design something partially or completely new just for the sake of being different, right? We don't have to have a bunch of Me Too's like that. But we do want to think very clearly, do I need or want this game to be very similar? Do I need it to be distinct in some specific way for the purposes of my interpretation to be more successful and effective with that? Then some practical questions to finish off. Question 10, what's your budget? How much time do you need to make this game? How much is the maintenance of this game? So for a memory game, somebody eventually is going to have to sort back through those decks and make sure there aren't any cards missing. Is that something that you'd really realistically need to do, reset, double check every time somebody has played the game? Is it once a week, maybe over my lunch break, just real quick, just flip through them and make sure? Once a year, pull that tote down off the shelf, blow the dust off, and be like, yep, nobody's played it in the last year, so all the cards are still there, right? So what is the maintenance? What's the life cycle of this game? If you're using mostly paper components, those will tear. If you're using pencil-drawn elements, those will blur, right? And so on and so forth. UV and freeze-thaw will gnaw away at anything that's installed permanently outside. So permanently really means until the material fatigue or photo degradation or vandalism or whatever takes that game installation to the end of its life. Okay? And we want to think about that stuff because if we're talking, among other things, about sustainability and interpretation as an important topic for the survival of the human race coming up, then we want to make sure that we are kind of walking that walk with our game designs and so forth. Make sense? Cool. All right. I'll go ahead and put the game design brief document. It's just a couple pages long. And again, just like a sentence or two for each of the blanks. It doesn't have to be a big essay. But as long as it's clear that you're thinking along each of these things for your, at least your initial game design, you're welcome to flip this over into another separate game design if you want to try out something else. Your burning desire is to try out some different prototypes over time. You can do that. And let's do that for Wednesday. Not a hard assignment at all. Yeah.
Would that print it off or?
I think either one is fine. Maybe have access to it so we can just kind of talk through folks and see what you're thinking during class. But, you know, save 5 cents to print it out. You don't need to do that for me. So, cool. I'll put a Dropbox on the website too so you can return a copy in there. All right. Cool. It's right about that time. We'll dismiss 11 seconds early. Thanks for working with me on the field trip coming up in April. I'm excited about it. I'm still excited about it. We didn't get to do it. So thanks for your flexibility on that. And we'll see you Wednesday. Cool. I'm around for questions if you have them.